All right, welcome to Joel and Ashley's Old Testament mapping project. Here's our URL, so it's just joe.info/openlayers. So when you go to this URL, this is the basic screen that pops up. We have a bunch of different buttons that pull up different shape files, as you can see here. We can organize it like a table. So it organizes it with a timeline, a time corresponding to each event. And let's take a look at our source code. Just to make it easier, I have it open over here with better colors so we can go through it a little bit better. So this is our index file that pulls most of our stuff together. So here's our title. It displays in the tab, and then it goes to our CSS, our style sheet. So let's take a look at that one. Most of it is the default. All of this is the OpenLayers default. But then when you get down to the basic typography, that's where we started changing stuff a bit. One of the things we changed the font to Papyrus to make it look more like Old Testament times. We changed a little bit with the headings, and we got some nice lines to come up, and then we also changed the button right here, our button example. This was to make each of the buttons the same width. They weren't like that automatically. We can go back and take a look at that. So they're nice and even in a grid now, and that looks really nice. All right, back to our index.
Okay, so we wanted to start out by declaring all our global variables, those that would be available at the global scale, and that's the list of them there. And then we get right into our initialize function, our init. And we start out by setting up the OpenLayers map with the API key, and we add the controls, the normal controls that you see, like the layer switcher, the navigation, and the scale line. And we created a hybrid map to go on that as a base map for the layers that we'll be adding. And then we get down to our 16 KML layers, and we have point layers, polygons, and lines, and we'll show examples of each of those. But we'll start out here by explaining the Abraham KML file. The Moses KML file, just as an example, as how we formatted our pop-up bubbles. So we converted these from ArcGIS using the layer to KML tool, and we got rid of most of the HTML content that came through with that tool and added our own stuff to make the pop-up formatting a little easier to see. So we have two tables in our body tag of our KML files, and each table has two rows and columns that contain the image that you see in the pop-up table, as well as a row for the scriptures that you can click on to go to the LDS.org version of those scriptures and read the scriptures in context. The second table has the snippet, the little explanation at the bottom of the image in the scriptures that you can read about the event. And then we close the HTML part of the KML and just define the style of the KML, so the colors and shapes and opacities for, as well as the coordinates for each KML layer.
All right, next we'll go over one of our point files. This is the one for Elijah, so that consisted of 4 different points, which are main events in the life of Elijah. So it starts off mostly the same. So we have our name, and then we just get right into the HTML. We set up the tables similar to the other things. All of our shapefiles, we really did clear out a lot of what the other ones had. So here we have setting up our table. We had to mess with the widths for a while to get them to look good in our pop-up bubbles. Here's the link to the image source that's going to show up. Then here's a link to the scripture. This target equals blank is just making the scripture open in a new tab instead of taking us the current window to the lds.org. And here has the coordinates of the first point and the style URL, and then we go through all the 4 points. They have the similar content, and then at the end, since there's multiple but they are all using the same icon style, we just had to define one right there. And it's linked to, this is just a PNG file that has just a little icon. We can just show that one really quick. Here is Elijah. So here's our 4 different points. They're all the same icon. You can click on them, and then you got the picture, and then a scripture with a link that opens in a new tab. There it is. And then we have a quick little snippet that tells about that event. We have all 4. So that looks pretty good.
So now, just as an example for our polygon, one of our polygon shapefiles, we'll look at the 12 tribes. It's similar to the Elijah in that it has multiple events in one KML file, and the HTML is formatted the same with the reference to the scriptures, the image, and the snippets, and then it goes through 12 different polygons and describes the coordinates for all of those and the scriptures for all 12 of them. And then down at the bottom, it lists the different ones because each one is a different color, and it also makes sure that the opacity is semi-transparent so that you can still see the base map underneath. So we'll look at it now. So you can see here that each tribe has its own color for a polygon, and you can click on each one and again look at the scripture in LDS.org and see the image and the short description underneath them. And so that is one of our polygon shapefiles.
Okay, so now we're going to get back into our index, into more of the hard coding. So after we set up all of our different layers that we wanted to have displayed, added them all to the map. This is setting them up to be selected, and those are the functions that we're going to talk about now as our feature select functions. This is just right here. I guess we can talk about that. It lists all of the selectable features that we have in our map, and then set up event listeners so that on feature select, like if it's selected, then it's going to run this function. If it's unselected, it will run this function. And those are right down here. So if it's unselected, then it destroys all the pop-ups. If it's selected, then it opens them up, and it just has a little bit of formatting stuff in there. And then if you close the event, then it unselects all of them. So that's pretty straightforward. We also made a function to set the country, and this is referenced in our buttons. And Joel is going to go ahead and explain those, but really quick, this is just right here, the code that set it up, the table at the top that has the years, so the timeline, and then the buttons underneath here.
So in our buttons, we set this, each button, the class for each button was the button example, and that was in the CSS file that we showed earlier to make sure that they were all the same width. And then on click, so that's an event listener for each button, it runs 2 functions. First, it closes any open pop-up bubble, and then it runs the set country according to the value that's found on the button. And so that is passed into the set country function when that button is clicked. And what that function does is it loops through all of the different layers, and it checks for the name of each layer, and it finds the one that's equal to the country that was found on the button that was pressed. And so when it finds that one, it turns it on, and it turns the rest of them off. And then the end of that function just has a default none that we call at the first of our initialize function to set the map, the extent of the map, to full extent. And so each one of our layers has a button associated with it, and so you can click on each button and it will zoom to the correct extent. And those are our buttons, and this is our site. We also point out that we have links to our help files and our technical documentations down here if you click on those links there. So we hope you enjoyed it and had fun putting it together, and maybe you can use this in a gospel class.